Hey, Tolerators, it's me, Natalie, with your before show updates on all things Team Tolerator. So, we are sitting on the January, February, March side of life. And what does that look like? Well, it looks like the misogyny meltdown over on Patreon is well underway. That is a new series and show that I am producing for Patreon members only because there is a lot of scripting and a lot of vulnerability going on. I've already sang a song, I've already produced a skit, I'm already writing comedy. So go take a chance on the misogyny meltdown and the way that To All the Men I've Tolerated Before is expanding and evolving with the link in the show notes. For January, we celebrated the Misogynist of the Year award ceremony. For February, we are focusing on the concept of love and self-love being part of the resistance. And in March, why, yes, we're still going to do seasonal things with celebrating International Women's Month. And all of that will be wrapped up into our new variety show, Misogyny Meltdown. I cannot wait for you to check it out. Hey, Tolerators, this is To All the Men I've Tolerated Before with Natalie Katona, your weekly look at everyday misogyny. Today, we are joined by Lyssa and Shardae, the host of the podcast, The Slovenly I Practiced. Slovenly I Speak English. Trolls, where they rant about D&D, feminism, and help battle our number one enemy, the patriarchy. Now, we have covered on the show about the gaming community in general and the misogyny that exists within players, but today we're going to get real spicy and talk about D&D lore. And I recently learned through your podcast that the reason I don't know more D&D lore is because I play 5e.
Literally, though.
Yeah, that checks out.
I was like, they have all of this background knowledge of the gods and the characters and the lands of D&D, and I just show up, and whatever the D&D tells me, I just go, what a smart lady.
Good for her.
Good for her. Made that all up. Like, she is, in fact, Matt Mercer.
She has transformed.
She, iconic, all of it. But welcome to the show, and thank you for combining my two worlds of anti-misogyny and D&D and the TTRPG community.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. So excited to be here.
Okay, so I gave a little abrupt intro to your podcast, but tell us how you got to be talking about how feminism and D&D intersect, or how D&D will try to repel itself from actually being equitable to all players. Things like that. How did we get here?
How did we get here? I guess it all spans from me, a mutual friend of ours. I guess I should start. A mutual friend of ours who introduced us. I joined not one, but two campaigns, one of which was Shardae's campaign. And as I got to know Shardae, we became pretty good friends over the years. And then Twitter happened. And back then,
yeah, unfortunately.
The inciting incident we can pinpoint to Twitter because there was a specific tweet that was going around in the TTRPG community, which became our first episode, that sort of launched us into the feminist rage that we felt when they talked about two big creators of D&D, one being Gary Gygax, one of the original founders of D&D, and how he had said some not so great things about women and women players. I can't remember exactly what the tweet was. Can you, Shardae?
It was, we have a screenshot on our sources page because obviously we cite all of our sources because we are extra queens and we have to. And we have the tweet somewhere, but it was basically just somebody basically digging up old dirt on Gary Gygax as well as a lead designer of 3.5 D&D named Jonathan Tweet, and basically calling out like, hey, these really prominent people who created the foundation of this hobby we all love so much, we got to remember that they were raging sexists at one point. And like seeing them like, wait, what? Like that's shocking because like at that time, Lyssa and I were just playing in all femme groups. We weren't super involved in the TTRPG space. Like we loved D&D and I watched a lot of Critical Role. So like I was somewhat tangentially like involved in that space, but I had no idea of the backlog. And so essentially with this person, I remember her handle is Kadera Spindrift because it's a very cool name. So I remember the name of the person who tweeted it. And it was just these two screenshots, one of which was Gary Gygax outing himself as a biological determinist, and the other one was Jonathan Tweet basically saying that women don't like playing D&D, they like LARPing instead, which is obviously a lower form of entertainment to basically every D&D designer that's ever talked about it, which is just so strange to me. But that was essentially the gist of it. And we saw that and we're like, we had our feminist rage. We're like, what the hell is this? We yelled at each other for at least 2-3 days straight. And then, because we both just recently finished our degrees, Lyssa finished her bachelor's, I finished my master's around the same time, we still were in that academic headspace. So we're like, wait a minute. So why did they think this way? And where did all this come from? And how can we even see it in D&D? Like, did it spill over? And those questions just kind of grew like a life of their own. And then we're like, maybe we should like talk about this like publicly. Maybe we should like start a podcast. And that's essentially, I don't remember who was the one who's like, we should start a podcast or what medium it was, but that's essentially, it just kind of grew from there, from one inciting incident on Twitter, pre-Elon Musk. It should also be stated. This was in 2020.
Back then it was still called Twitter. It was not X. It was still Twitter.
Pre the hideous, ugly icon I immediately removed from my phone. I was like, you're not pretty enough to be on my phone. Ew.
No, it's real bad.
It's real bad. I truly, when it comes to for our listeners who aren't part of the TTRPG community and indulge me screaming about Dimension 20 and Critical Role at you all of the time, LARPing is live action role play. To hear it like deemed as the feminine part of D&D,
I know, right?
where you're literally in the woods, sometimes for days, with foam swords and cardboard like armor, hitting one another.
They basically called it dressing up pretty and acting out fantasies. Is how they put it.
Clearly they'd never LARPed before. I LARPed all through high school. So like what you just described, that's exactly what we did. Like we hit each other with foam swords. We had little bean bags as spell packets is what we called them. And we would throw bean bags at each other to say that, like a ranged spell attack kind of vibe. Or like if you hit it, that means they got, the spell. We also use them to kind of outline, area of effects and stuff. Like it's all like in the same nerd sphere. It's just a different flavor of it. And I don't know, I'm sure there are definitely LARPs out there who do dress up and who do like very heavy role play. And it's like you go to like a masquerade ball and it's all political intrigue. And that's wonderful. And I want to do that so bad. That's not the LARP I did, but like I'm sure maybe they were thinking of that. But even if they were, like, that sounds awesome. What do you mean? Like, why are you being a dick about it?
Yeah, to me, it's just strange the fact that like people sitting around a table yelling at each other about dice, math, and describing how they hit them things versus them going out into the world yeeting like actual things at each other, hitting people with foam swords, and then they're like, "Oh yeah, the physical labor is like so feminine."
So
which is like,
I
what? Why? How?
Yeah.
Where's the logic?
Well, and also like the just dressing up and playing out their fantasies. Well, it's like, okay, but if I'm just dressing up to dress up and I don't have a fantasy at all, your go to is to grope me because you've always wanted to grope Harley Quinn. Like,
Oof.
Yeah.
Oof. Yeah, that's a whole other layer. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and ask me to hump my friends and do like
Ugh.
sit ups on them. Like, truly.
God. I have a feeling that comes
Mm.
from personal experience, and I'm so sorry. Oh, God.
Dear God.
I've been to Gen Con the past 20 years. The things I have seen men ask women just because they are in
Oh.
costume.
Oh no. No, 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 no,
God.
no.
I've been to one con, and it was, what's the name of the con in London? It's, MCM or something. I think MCM or something. And it was a wonderful experience. That the one con I've ever been to was totally fine. But also, I didn't dress up. But not that that's an invitation for anything. Like, obviously, it is 100% not. But I'm genuinely, like, still a little bit trepidatious to go to cons because of exactly the stories that you're talking about. Because I've heard so many people talk about them. And it's horrifying.
The chokehold that people who believe in misogyny have on the TTRPG community and how angry they are should you call them on their internal belief in misogyny. Because Gen Con does try to put on a really good front to make it safe, to make it like, as the con and as the people who are throwing the con, we are your ally. We are queer allies. We are trans allies. We are making this a safe space. And then the privileged people who have never had to think about whether or not they're an ally or in a safe space or making a space unsafe for someone else spend the entire con just like tearing that down. Like, why do we have to do that? Why would you need to know my pronouns? Why would I not get to put my arm around her? All of it.
The fact that somebody wants to dress up as a sexy, iconic figure from their favorite video game does not give people consent to touch that said person. And the number of times I've heard, like, oh yeah, she dressed up as Lara Croft, or like, oh yeah, she dressed up as insert feminine figure with breasts and bikini armor, just because they're wearing supposedly very little, like bikini armor or something, and you have this fantasy of always having wanted to bang said, character, that doesn't give you consent to touch that person. Like, I don't understand where this entitlement comes from, where they think that obviously you're here for me. You're here for me to be able to live my fantasy. You're an object. I'm living my fantasy, and I'm going to touch you and like brush past you and just treat you like an everyday object. And it's like they don't even consider the fact that women have feelings, women are people too, and people who aren't, it's not just women too, like it's anyone who's like hot essentially and becomes a target and becomes a sex object that they are looking at with, like, drool dripping down their chin, and they're like bringing their grubby little hands and going like, ooh, meat touch, which is so gross.
Yeah, it's so gross
and just so simple-minded. I just don't understand where they get the audacity.
And then there's like this cognitive dissonance that happens at cons where it's like, well, this is just like D&D Disney World, right? Because you're all dressed up as my favorite people. And it's like, no. So when a man who is in cosplay, one year when I was a teenager, some guys were dressed up as minstrels, and my dad really liked their costumes. So he was like, go ask them for a picture. So my sister and I were like, hey, can we get our picture taken with you? And they got down on one knee, each of them, and then like presented their knee and their lap for my sister and I to sit upon. And I looked at him and I was like, I'm double thinking this. And my dad was like, sit on his lap so we can have a photo. And I was like, and I perched myself in a very little, I don't want to be touching this man way, while they got to have a chuckle at my expense. But I've always wanted to LARP in the way that LARPing should be done, in full costume with a foam sword and with Paul Rudd, ever since Role Models.
Oh my gosh. Have you seen Knights of Badassdom?
Yes, that's the one with, is
That's
Peter Dinklage in that one?
Yes, that's Peter
Yes.
Dinklage. Yeah. It's a movie, for those of you who don't know, it's a movie all about LARP. And I'm not saying it's a good movie. It's really not. It's a fun movie. It's very fun. Is it the best plot structure ever? Is best character development? Absolutely not. But it's super fun. And when I showed it to my friends, we all just kind of agreed, because I watched it first in high school and then I rewatched it recently with some friends because they'd never seen it. And I think we all agreed that the actors just look like they're having the time of their lives. And that's just a delight to watch, even if it's not good. Like, they look like they're having like the best summer ever. And like, you can just feel that. And it's in this LARP setting and there's like a murder, but it's serious, but not super serious. I do recommend. I think it's on Amazon Prime, or it was when I watched it, but it could have easily moved or be taken off because streaming is doing a bunch of weird things recently. So, yeah.
I think what's so interesting about your show and what you're doing is going, hey, we get it. Players who have agency while they are playing the game could be misogynist or racist, or really want to be like pushing the limits and the bar by being like, well, my character's a creep, but I would never, or anything like that. But what you're doing is going, right, but the game backs you up with the story it's presenting you. And I think we're, especially right now, in this whole thing where it's like, are we thinking too much? Are we thinking too little about the content that we have taken in as individuals? I think it's really important to go, well, if good old Gary backed you up and said, ladies have no place in my game unless they're sexy, sexy sex goddesses, why would I feel comfortable in his game?
That's exactly the problem. I feel like it just stems from so many different viewpoints and so many different backgrounds to begin with. So there's like a problem with gaming in general and the gaming culture and geek masculinity, and how the geek masculinity kind of community got together because they weren't traditionally masculine, so they created their own space. It was a safe space for them. Now, when you have people who are minorities, for example, women and other minorities who want to suddenly join this community of geek masculines and they don't fit into the mold that the geek masculines now made, it becomes this sort of gatekeeping and gaslighting kind of war between the minorities who are just trying to share the space and to have fun with the hobby, versus the geek masculines who are like, no, we were here first, this is our thing, you're not like a traditionally geek masculine. Or if you're trying to enter the community, it's like, well, name me like 3 iconic monsters of D&D. Name all of the places, all the cities ever existing in the Forgotten Realms. Like, do you even know your lore? But it's like it's such a bigger problem than that, because even the foundations of what D&D was built onto, which was wargaming, stemmed from men who were interested in wars and kind of played those out. It became a community of, it grew into like adding that role playing element, which appealed more so to feminine people and to other people than not just, you know, these geek masculines who were into war. But it drew in a bigger audience. But still, the foundations of where it came from and how, because our most recent episode took a look at Dragon Magazine, even like the Dragon Magazine, which is an official publication of D&D, the inherent pronouns of he, him used to describe like 90-80% of DMs, so the people who run the game, or the players, or the majority of the characters, or the examples given. It's like this misogyny and this masculinity is so ingrained into all of it that when you read through it, you're just so off put by, okay, I can't see myself being here because clearly there's no women here, so I'm not the target audience.
It's literally built into the game. Like, because this game was created by white men, cis white men, presumably, for cis white men. They inherently, you know, from the time they grew up and all the prejudices that they may or may not have had, all the stuff that they went through in life, they brought that baggage, and they, willingly or not, they put it into the game. Like, we've been researching this for 3 years, and like, there is absolutely no doubt in our mind whatsoever that they brought some baggage in that game, and they presented it in not only the lore, but also, like Lyssa said, like the pronouns, the mechanics. Like, if you're familiar with AD&D, they had a strength cap on female characters throughout all of first edition D&D, because according to biology, women can't be stronger than men. And they, you know, justified it because of quote unquote realism. And yet it's a game about, you know, magic and dragons. And obviously, you know, they don't go realistic with everything. They just go realistic to people, to portray people that aren't like them. Because to them, it's their fantasy. It's not the other people's fantasy. It's their white male fantasy. And you just keep digging even further, and it's not even just a D&D problem. We say this all the time. It's not D&D. It's fantasy writing, which is predominantly white and male. It is the patriarchy in general. It's capitalism. It's all of these big, bad, evil guys. And we say it all the time, like, Gary Gygax, he definitely did some shady stuff. He's not the big, bad, evil guy here, though. He is a product of all of these other things, which makes the whole, you know, it just makes the whole of D&D just such a fascinating case study for just society in general and game culture in general. And, like, the more layers that you know, peel back, the more photos you put on that conspiracy board, you're like, oh, it's all connected. All this red string, it's everywhere. And it's so fascinating how much D&D just reflects culture and life, and it never ceases to amaze us, the amount of things that we find that we can link to, you know, different things in real life. It's fascinating, it's depressing in some instances, but it's also empowering because we have to talk about it, and when we talk about it, we need to encourage each other to do better and be like, listen, we can't change the past, but we can change the future. And we can learn from all of this, you know?
When you said there was a strength cap and then you gave the reasoning behind it, my brain immediately went, well, wasn't that what Dax Shepard was arguing with Jonathan Van Ness about trans youth in sports when it came to the armchair
right. I did hear
expert?
about that. Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Dax Shepard won our Misogynist of the Year award for 2023 for
good
that
reason,
little moment.
like.
So good for
Yeah.
Dax. Congratulations once again, Dax. So yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, well, why? Why do we have to understand why things are misogynistic or, you know, biased by nature? And it's like, well, because we're still holding on to those biases. And as people in our culture change and those biases you think just naturally go away because we outgrew them. No, we evolve the biases.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The biases evolve and they take new shapes, and they either get stronger or they get a lot better at hiding, you know, and then it'll just jump scare you. Like at the, like just being on Twitter has for X amount of years has just really opened my eyes to that. And now on TikTok is just like, oh, nope, I still get jump scared occasionally about how like some people just are so content to run their mouths and hide under the anonymity of the internet and just say the most god awful things for attention, or just because they need just because they want a voice. I don't know what their reasoning is, but these things aren't going to go away. They haven't gone away, but they will hopefully through the process of just like, you know, sociological evolution eventually, but they're not going to go away on their own. I think Lyssa, this has been her like hyper focus recently of just like, change doesn't happen on its own. We have to make the change. We can't expect change to just happen. We have to talk about it.
No, because like I think like one of the biggest realizations and one of the biggest like points of anger for us, again from our most recent episode looking at Dragon Magazine, was that a woman presumably, or there was a woman author included, wrote that eventually misogyny or sexism will go away and women will be allowed to like play D&D. And this was in what, the 80s?
The 80s? Early 80s, yeah.
And it was like the second line of the article. And I lost my shit. I could not tell you. Well, I mean, you'll hear it on the episode, but I just lost my mind where I'm like, what does this person think is going to happen? We evolve like when fish evolved to walk on land, thousands of years later, what you think that we're going to evolve to accept women into D&D? Is that what you really think that, oh, like with time, it'll change? That's such a utopia sort of view on culture, and it doesn't even recognize how ingrained the patriarchy and all of these fundamental problems that we've just grown up through history. Because like once you start looking into it, and like we've done so many episodes where I'm like the self-titled context queen. So Shardae is the horror lore. She looks at the actual lore of like, okay, these are the worlds, these are the creatures, these are their stats, that kind of stuff. I'm the context queen, so I bring in sociology, I bring in psychology, I look at geek masculinity, and I'm like, this is the definition of geek masculinity. This is what I think is happening in this situation. So I bring in like that real world context, and then try to remember that, oh yeah, guys, we're still talking about D&D. I don't know if you know this, but we're a D&D podcast. But it's just like, it's so ingrained when you start looking into it, and how women are so interlinked with what's monstrous and the monstrous feminine, and femininity as being a monster. It goes back so far into history through religion and through beliefs, and like we're talking past the Middle Ages. We're talking like some of the stuff we've looked at is like the Bronze Age, and like, when Beowulf was written, like the beginning of time, and then Adam and Eve and stuff like that. So it's not just like the past 2024 years. It's way past that. This is such an inherent big problem that
it's not just going to go away.
I don't think dinosaurs had the time to get rid of sexism if they had the chance.
Oh, but what if they had?
We'll never know because of that damn meteor,
We should ask the chickens, because supposedly dinosaurs became chickens.
Oh, right.
And what, alligators? So what if the chickens have it all correct? So
yeah.
Well,
and it's also so funny because I feel like in the animal kingdom, the females, because they are the like legacy of the herd or of the like all of it, they do like, I think about like lion prides and gorilla packs and stuff, and I'm like, oh, it is women running those. Like I have seen grown men gorillas pout at the zoo because they didn't get their way while the women are just existing and raising children.
Literally, exactly that.
When you're doing a character build on Baldur's Gate, I recently put Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 on my Switch. I have no context if this is still true in Baldur's Gate 3, and I would hope to God that they've changed it. But something, now that I am a feminist podcaster who only looks for misogyny in all things,
of course,
I had to pause while I was building my character because they make a point when you hover over the female icon to go, hey, don't worry. If you choose to play a girl in this game, they can be strong and there's no movement impairment and they can do everything the boys can do.
I remember that. So I booted up Baldur's Gate 1 a couple of years ago now, I think. And I remember seeing that. And I think I just blacked it out. And now you just reminded me. It 100% says that. And I guess context-wise, I believe the Baldur's Gate games were based off of 2nd edition D&D rules, which is in first edition. It's the one that it's it's the edition that thinks that he him pronouns are gender neutral.
Oh.
So it has that kind of attitude in it, unfortunately. But I have played through Baldur's Gate 3, and I can safely say they don't do that anymore. Thank God. They even let you be non-binary, which is amazing. Or trans, if you want to be. Like, you could be literally anything you want. And it's a great case study, like, looking at Baldur's Gate 1, like, the BioWare isometric one, and looking at Baldur's Gate 3 and seeing all the changes they make. There's still some stuff with Baldur's Gate 3 I have problems with, naturally, because, as you said, as a feminist podcaster looking for misogyny wherever I go, I see many things, and they may be nitpicky to a lot of people, and they may 100% be correct, but I can't unsee it. Once you have that, what should we call them? Like the hot pink feminist goggles? Like, you can't take them off. They are hot glued to our faces for eternity.
Yeah, I will blame men on everything, and that is my right as someone who gets trolled on the internet.
Right.
And then fantasy literature, which is also so great because we would not have D&D should there not be an audience for fantasy literature. This just came up today. I was scrolling through Instagram, and they were talking about classroom literature, like literature, the classics that you read in class. And they were like, stop ignoring these women in your classrooms who are like, hey, this text in its nature, whatever it could be, is misogynistic. I think we're done. We're done with it on the curriculum. And people were commenting and stuff. And I just went, he doesn't harp on it as often. But when I told my dad, no, I'm not reading this, it was his favorite book, Lord Falsbane, which is like one of the like more popular fantasy novels or something. And it's about a man who gets who is a leper. He has leprosy. And he gets transported to a magical land through magical beings or something, and his leprosy is cured. And the very first act that he enacts as a well-bodied man is to sexually assault the first woman he comes upon. And I told my dad.
God.
My God. What?
I told my dad, I was like, no. And he's like, why? I go, I'm not getting past that. I go, you just told me that this man is a hero, an archetype, one of the first fantasy heroes. It's a no for me. And he's like, well, you don't get it. Through the journey that is life and the redeeming and the funny, you didn't even get to the funny giant that teaches him to have a sense of humor about the world. And I'm like, I don't need to know
I don't
want his redemption story. I go, he couldn't even take one breath to celebrate the fact that like all of his ailments were gone. He was an able-bodied man experiencing things he had never experienced before. His first notion was to enact violence on a woman.
God. It makes me so angry. And I mean, we talked about this on our Swan May episode, right? We traced the Swan May, which is a lycanthrope. It's not it's a therianthrope because it's not a wolf. But they call it a lycanthrope. Which extended, I think, all the way, to 3 it was 3.5 or was it 40? 3.5, I think. Because it ended as a prestige class.
Yeah. Until like AD&D until 3.5.
Yes. So we traced that specific, because it started off in the Monster Manual, and then it ended up as a prestige class. And we traced Swan Maze and Swan Mythology. That's one of the things we traced to the Bronze Age. And we also traced it to this fantasy book that is escaping me now. If you are curious about it, it's on our source page. And it's also on our episode. Totally listen to it if you want to. But there's this very famous fantasy author that is highly credited with inspiring a lot of D&D, along with the other obvious ones. Even though Gary Gygax's Lord of the Rings didn't inspire D&D, he's wrong. Then this book that this famous fantasy author wrote had swan maidens in it, and swan maiden mythology. And swan maiden mythology is just like an allegory for domestic violence. And you can see that in the book and like how this character, this love interest, is treated throughout this entire book. And she's supposed to be seen as basically like the heroine of the book, even though she's just, stereotypical, love interest. And it's just like, it's so disheartening. And you see that the people who made D&D, they read those books. And you can see that they read those books because they take stuff and they put it from there into their fantasy game. And they just continue this pattern of misogyny and like abuse of women and really terrible representation for other minorities. Like it is almost like an endless cycle. Like it's awful.
And my byline for it, whenever someone pushes it back and is like, so you just don't want the world to be flawed to begin with. And I'm like, and I always go with, well, it's how you're presenting the flaws of the world that you have built to me. If you're just being grotesque to be grotesque, that's your personality. You're grotesque. If you are giving us a chance to, use our prestige, our honor, our reputation within the community to help this woman out of a situation, yeah, that's an awareness point. Like, good for us. We are heroes. We should want to care about that. We should do that. But if you're just like, and my character, because he didn't have a father figure in his life, likes to beat his wife who is also in the party, then it's a no for me.
The thing is that whenever they use something like that they're like, okay, well, the Vikings, when they were around, they sexually assaulted, people that they went into the cultures of. So there's this realism. Like, why aren't you understanding that sexual assault in games of D&D is just realism? But then when it comes to it's like that hypocrisy where like everyone else is subject to realism. The world has to be realistic. It has to be based on history until you come to the fucking men. Like, why aren't we rolling for how long they can keep it up? Why are there pregnancy rolls, but there's no like impotence rolls? Why is it realistic that, she would get pregnant after being sexually assaulted? Why is that funny? Because it's funny for them from their point of view. But then when it comes to themselves, it's like, no, that's off the books. We don't touch that. This is a fantasy game. So obviously we will overlook that fact. And it becomes this hypocrisy of like everybody else is subject to realism, but then we get to choose what we want, and we get to cherry pick the traits, the things. I can have super buff muscles, but guess what? Women can't be muscular. They have to be slim. They have to be pretty. They have to be vain. They have to be sexy. They have to be all bards, and they can sing, and they can like wear bikini armor. They're not allowed to wear anything that's like revealing or like covering up. And it's just like, if you're going for realism, then let's actually go for realism. I want the men to have negative realistic mechanics in the game. If we're going for actually in history this happened, well, let's add that to the game then. Why are we cherry picking and placing mechanics and like caps and all of these negative things on anyone else who isn't a white cis man?
And how often are you taking, because there were a lot of, I have a like 1700 page book in my bedroom that I can read 10 pages out of at a time because it makes me angry. But it's about when women ran the earth and the spirituality of the earth and all of it. And so where is your representation of all of these cultures who were just literally hanging out until men came in and colonized their land, their cultures, and their bodies?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, they do exist, and then that's how the racist elements of D&D come into play, because when you're looking at D&D, you're playing from the perspective of a European colonizer. And arguably, you could make so many arguments, and there's been like people have studied this, and have said that, these races of fantasy races of, beings are based on, actual nationalities of actual people from the real world. Like, we don't have to look very far. When you look at AD&D, they literally take inspiration, and by inspiration, I'm saying air quotes, they literally gamify actual religions. So there's the Finnish religion. So I'm from Finland, and that makes me really angry. There's the Egyptian gods became into, like, they're taking real world beings and influences, and not just influence, they're actually gamifying real world things and putting it into the game. And then we're wondering why it's problematic.
Well, and also we applaud that. Like when it all came out that Tolkien and everything Tolkien wrote was an allegory for World War II, people were like, hell yeah, finally, a war with orcs. Mm-hmm. It's all I've ever wanted. Thank you so much.
Oh God, don't even get me started on Tolkien. That's my trigger word.
Yeah.
We did a 2-part thing on orcs, and we talked a lot about Lyssa looked into Tolkien as her context queen, and I was both so happy and so sad to see, because like she grew up, I don't want to speak for you, but you grew up like really loving Tolkien and loving Lord of the Rings. I didn't. I've hated it from the start for multiple reasons. But, like, I've never liked Tolkien, but then listened to the context for Tolkien, and just watching the progression of her, like, just being more and more crestfallen was genuinely heartbreaking. It was also, like, validating for me, because I'm like, yeah, I've been saying this stuff for a really long time, but just because, like, you never want to see somebody be miserable. You never want to see somebody, like, watches their hero falls from grace, or watch somebody that they admire fall from grace because they are a very flawed person. Like, I'm a millennial. I grew up with Harry Potter. Like, I watched the fall of J.K. Rowling. That's still heartbreaking to me, and I'm still dealing with that emotionally. Like, we look into so many of these things, and like we come to earth on a lot of it, and it takes a bit to process, like literally all of that, because it changes everything, really. Like, and that's why we try. Sometimes we do better than others, but we try to give the benefit of the doubt as much as we possibly can. And we also try not to hate on men that much, honestly, because men are just as much victims of the patriarchy as we are. Like, the patriarchy hurts everybody. And no matter, you see the word feminism, you automatically think, like you were saying, like, oh, I hate all men, which is like, yeah, it's a joke. I say that literally all the time. I hate all men. I don't, actually. Like, I love my dad and my brother and like all my male friends, and I have nothing against that, because we're all under this umbrella of patriarchy, and we're all suffering together. So let's just band together and like fuck it all, like literally.
Well, and I think, and we've talked about this before, about how the myth that I was fed about women in the gaming community was women didn't want to be in the gaming community. In fact, they had a natural inclination to be disgusted and turned off by the gaming community and men who are gamers. And therefore, there was no, like, it wasn't that there wasn't a place for them. It was that we ourselves had ostracized the gaming community. Right. And I call it like the Big Bang Theory effect, where it's like, oh, you all really convinced us that you were really socially awkward, adorable geeks who we were mean to. And that's how we got here. And that's how you wrote books upon books about, yeah, sure, we have magic or whatever, but it's going to be lady magic. That's the episode I'm currently working through, is you talking about the feminine and the masculine, like, delineation of magic.
It's so weird, because Gary Gygax said the same thing of, like, well, we tried to have women play the game, which women included, I think, his wife, his daughters, and then they just didn't jive with the way that they had created the game, because obviously it was created for white men. And then they determined that like based on case studies that we did, a handful of people, less than 5, women just don't like role-playing games or tabletop role-playing games. And it was just like, you tried it with your daughters. How old were they? What was their interests? Were they geeky? How hard did you actually try? Because I don't think it was very hard.
It also reminds me of Gamergate. Like that whole Gamergate. And I think, Lyssa, you did the context for that one for when we talked about it. I don't even remember what episode we talked about Gamergate. We bring it up quite often, but you did do like a brief analysis on Gamergate and geek masculinity and how like women, as soon as like Anita Sarkeesian kind of, and this one other woman that I always forget the name of, I'm so sorry, but I remember Anita Sarkeesian specifically because she was, I think, the most vocal that I saw around the time, and like how ostracized she was just by pointing out like, hey, this is sexist, this is misogynist, this is, and then like this tidal wave of just really like hurt, I guess, men just going after her all at once because she was attacking something that they loved. And we see that even now with D&D. Like, it's, I don't know if it's necessarily on the same scale. I think it's more widespread in different, like, you know, niches and areas. But yeah, it just reminds me of Gamergate. Like this whole idea.
Yeah. Well, and they're really good at like making it feel like, well, it's not that I'm a misogynist, because that would mean that I hate that all women could be in this game. I hate specifically how Marisha Ray plays a druid, and in no way does that have anything to do with my feelings towards any women who get to be more successful than me doing a thing that I love. Let's talk about lore examples. As you dive into your research, were there any repeated heavy hitters like, oh, of course we ran into this trope again, or any surprises where you were like, I never thought of that as misogynistic, and yet here it is. It's right here.
The first,
I feel like there's
so many. The first one that comes to mind is just evil women. Full stop.
Yeah.
Just like associating women and a lot of feminine attributes with evil. That is super fun. And again, it's not just in D&D, it's everywhere. But you see like a lot of the evil goddesses, all of these evil goddesses that we've looked into in our episodes, except maybe one. I think Tulona is the one exception that I've seen. All the evil goddesses in the Forgotten Realms that we've looked at, just sex bombs. They're sexy evil. And you're supposed to be, I think, turned on by them and also want to kill them, but not really. You want to bang them. And it's this very interesting dichotomy with that. But yeah, that's the first one that came to my mind. I see that all the time with the evil goddesses that we look at. It is.
Not that I have done any research on this, and honestly what I'm doing right now is conceptualizing an episode, but that whole point of, well, she's sexy and you want to have sex with her, but you also kind of want to kill her, and the way that people view their own sexuality, and is like, is sexuality a loving act? Is it a conquering act? Is it a violent act? Yeah.
Oof. I mean, that's a whole can of worms that has to do with Lyssa's special interest of Christianity in D&D.
Oh.
Oh boy.
The god showing up into D&D.
What do you mean? D&D is not based on the real world in any way, shape, or form. D&D wasn't created by one male god called Ao, and then he created all the other things under his image. What do you mean?
Never heard of that before.
But I did reach out to someone today who does a deconversion Christianity podcast to be like, I need to explore how the 7 deadly sins are everywhere, and their main focus in life is to keep women and other marginalized voices quiet and pliable. I will say that I have my own, when you said you know, they're sexy, but they're kind of bad and you kind of don't get it. My mind immediately went to Tim Curry and Legend, because when people are like, what's your weirdest crush? I'm like, is Tim Curry being the devil in Legend? You're supposed to really want to love Tom Cruise. And yet I would never leave this man's cave.
Right.
Right.
Listen, there's something hot about morally gray characters when they're in fantasy.
And isn't that so? Because that's also a privilege that I don't believe women characters are naturally inclined to receive, is the morally gray. It's like she is either Susie, the very nice angelic virgin, or she is sexy, sexy Medusa who wants to turn you to stone, but you can't not look at her.
Yeah, women aren't allowed to be nuanced, and people say that, oh, D&D isn't meant to be nuanced. D&D is supposed to be black and white. It's supposed to be evil versus good. That's why the alignment chart exists, right? So things can fit into these boxes, so we don't need to think as hard. And to a certain extent, I do get that. Sometimes you want to turn off your brain when you play D&D. I totally understand that. But when it becomes harmful and you are associating specific like body types or specific personality traits or specific stereotypes with certain alignments, that's kind of where it starts to be like, how about no? How about not really? Because again, if you look at, you know, the example I said earlier about all female D&D goddesses of the Forgotten Realms that are, you know, evil, they're also sexy. You look at I always look at on the podcast, like, is there a male equivalent to this? And yeah, they're totally sexy, evil male gods. Are you Graz?
Yes.
Are you
Graz.
kidding me? Graz, the demon lord? Super sexy. He's meant to be sexy. But there's also other gods that are like that which lurks, which is just a giant ooze god. And that's it. There's Vecna, who in some editions is a god, some isn't, but is like a lich appearing, super ugly, evil god. There are evil appearing, masculine presenting gods in abundance, but you don't see that much nuance even in appearance with, you know, feminine presenting ones. So it's disheartening to look at for sure, but that's, I mean, part of the territory at this point.
Yeah, I had a feeling that we would lean into the sexy bad lady. That lady's bad, but damn is she sexy.
Yeah.
And there has been people who have done studies on the women are either villains or they're victims. Women are either survivors or they are victims. And sometimes it takes a special stage of evil to be like, I will be a survivor of all of this. And I will say that in the lore that I have listened to on your podcast, it is a lot of the time where it's like, well, she went through something horrific, didn't she?
Of course, yeah. I mean, Mommy Lolth, she did literally nothing wrong. Lolth did nothing wrong, and we will die on that hill forever and always.
Well, and so I'm a big Greek mythology nerd. So this whole idea, I would cover this entire home with Medusa if I had the discretionary income.
Mm-hmm.
But this reclaiming of Medusa's story where it's like, hey, you don't just wake up one day, put yourself in a cave and go, I know, I will turn men to stone forever and for always. Like, something happens to you. Like, and whether it was assault, being jilted by a lover, any of it, it's like, no, these people have stories, and that story is important. I would even venture to be like, the evil oozes background story, that's got to be dope. I would want to know it. Yeah, it's the whole idea of we don't have to look past evil lady because we know that ladies are evil. This makes sense to me.
Again, history tells us so. So why would you question
Helen of
it?
Troy had 2 entire nations destroy the world over her.
Exactly.
And all she did was show up.
Exactly.
She just existed.
Eve had the audacity to bite the apple And now mankind is fucked because of Eve. So we can just all blame it on women. And women, Pandora's box. Everything bad happened because of Pandora. Like, we look at mythology, we look at history, like, yes, men did bad things, but how much are we holding them accountable? How much are we holding them accountable versus the women of, oh my god, Pandora, oh my god, Eve did this, and she's such a bitch. And she's working together with a snake, and she's working together with Lucifer, and now there are witches because, women and demons and devils, they're always working together. So let's just drown everyone. Like, you trace it back in history, and then again, it's not just a D&D problem. It's a real world problem. And we're back at here, and then D&D's like, oh, look, there's this cool lore in the world and these myths that we could just shove into, our multiple versions of D&D, which I don't know if we explained, but there's like multiple versions throughout history. So like going from AD&D, and then when they revise it, it like becomes 2E 3.5 and then 4 and 5, and now we're at 5. But like even when like it's put into the original and it gets revised into going into 2E into 3.5, there's still some of it that slips through the cracks when we come into 2E. And then it still slips through and it comes into 3E, and then we're in the 21st century, and you're still seeing the same sexist problems, in this day and age. Sometimes it gets,
They make it worse.
Or sometimes, yeah.
I have an example that obviously comes to mind: the Banshees. I will never stop harping on about Banshees. Lyssa did the context for our Banshee episode, and I made a special note to just not listen when she was running through, because we usually run through our episodes beforehand. And the visceral reaction I had to how different Banshees of Celtic mythology lore are from the Banshees that are in fantasy lore, I will never shut up about it. It is expansive. And D&D took that, shrieking, feminine, ghostly form who just kind of shrieks and kills people. They took that all the way through, I think, 3.5. And then in 4E, they started to make it a little bit better. They, I believe, they gave her more of a reason. Like, hey, these spirits were wronged in life. Here's the reason that they're like this. And then you get to 5E. They erase all of that. And then they say, no, these are just spurned elf maidens. And they really like shiny trinkets.
Oh, not a shiny trinket.
Always that's another pattern. Shiny trinkets. And I'm just like, what you were on the right track. The 4E Banshees were not perfect, but you were on the right track to improving them. And then you just swing and a miss. You just made it worse. And I don't know how or why, but they did. And they, leaned into those stereotypes once more. And it doesn't happen often, but it does happen that sometimes 5E is the worst for lore.
They Banshees be shopping them. They were like, Banshees, they be shopping. Bitches be shopping. Banshees be shopping.
Literally. That's probably exactly, who pitched that. They're like, bitches be shopping, Banshees be shopping. That's the pitch. They're going in the monster manual. And that's such an important discussion to have just in D&D in general, just outside of, the whole perspective of even feminism and inclusivity. Is just every D&D table is different. So we may harp on, the history of D&D is super sexist and racist and ableist and da-da-da-da-da. Because it is. These are facts. We have cited sources to say that. We still love D&D, and we play it 2, sometimes 3 times a week. And it's your experience and your enjoyment of D&D as a game is totally sometimes just completely dependent on your table, who you choose to play with, whether they are friends, whether they're strangers, whether they're family, and how comfortable you are at the table. Those are really big factors in your enjoyment of D&D. And, even outside of that, just TTRPGs in general. What systems do you want to play? Because D&D is the big head honcho of TTRPGs. But it's not the only TTRPG out there. If you don't like the mechanics of D&D and you just don't jive with it, there's probably another system out there for you. You just want to play vampires? Oh boy, do I have the system for you. There's Vampire the Masquerade. you want to play werewolves? Oh, Werewolf the Apocalypse is the thing. You want to, play something that's very, very specific, but you don't quite have the system? Oh, GURPS exists. You can make your own system. Like, there's this whole just ecosystem out there of all of these games. We hyper focus on D&D because that's my favorite system, and it's the system that I play the most and the one that has the most deep lore, in my opinion. To like really, and also TTRPGs in general, they all kind of in a way spurn from D&D or spawn from D&D, because D&D is the first ever TTRPG, and so even all these other systems, they can all trace back to being inspired by D&D. And it's just this expansive experience that is so dependent on so many factors. Like, just because it has all these problems doesn't mean they can't be fixed, and doesn't mean you can't have fun playing this game. Because, like Lyssa said, we played all 7 tables and we have the best time. Like, it is great.
Speaking of like just projecting something onto a game because it's something that you're just convinced would happen, as a room full of people who are like, people do bad things to women, we mistook a small business that we just kind of happened upon as a sex trafficking ring. Like something,
Oh no.
something dinged in my head or someone else's head, and then we all convinced one another. We were like, this is sex trafficking. And then my DM was like, are you sure? And I was like, listen, I know everything. If it's drug trafficking, sex trafficking's right behind it. Like, I was like, I know and we accosted this man who was just like doing his normal shop man day. And and we have a DM player, a DM NPC, because we adopted him. She didn't go, I think it would be really great if I too had a party member. I was like, this man is bad at his job. He will die in woods and he has to come with us. And she was like, And then we built an entire story arc around him that we often ignore to do other things. And so he asked, he was like, so what was the deal back there? And by then my character had kind of gone, oh, we're lunatics. Like, we were just really convinced that the only reason we would roll a die and show up somewhere is for there to be something to fix, aka sex trafficking. And so I was like, Matilda just looks at Caden and goes, we just really misread that situation. We gotta go. We really just thought that guy was creepy, and maybe he was just a little awkward, and we turned it into a whole thing. Like a whole thing.
And again, like another group who was presented with that same situation, they would not have taken it that route probably, or they would have taken it that route but taken it like a completely different way, which is one of the beauties of D&D. It could be taken like, you can use the lore that's really awful, or you can improve it, or you can come up with your own lore, or you could just have shenanigans all day, every day. Yeah.
Or you could also just go in there, meet the guy, be like, no, and then just walk out after he's given you a quest and be like, we're not interested. So, well, let's go dig a tunnel. Let's go dig a tunnel under his house instead. Let's see what we find there. And then the DM's scrabbling to like come up with something interesting that's underneath the house.
Shout out to all the DMs. Shout out to Brennan Lee Mulligan, who I'm a Worlds Beyond Number Patreon member, so I get to hear their in-between episode chats. And Lou said on this week's, he goes, you could just tell that Brennan had all of that lore written on a Post-it note somewhere, and he was like, it's never going to come up. And then for against all odds, it came up. And Brennan got to be like, oh, yes, I wrote this down.
You stumbled upon something I actually planned for.
Oh, so, love out to all of the DMs, because I've never done it.
Really?
No.
Oh my gosh. Every player should DM at least once. I'm a DM, so I should say that. Like, it's my opinion that every player should DM at least once, even if it's just a one shot, just to like, and if you don't like it, that's 100% valid. Like, not everybody needs to be a DM. I just think everybody should maybe have the experience of being one at least once, just to like test it out. Maybe you like it, maybe you don't, but it'll at least give you like an understanding of like the game from a different perspective.
And I just think that it's so empowering to be a DM because you're basically the storyteller. You are the person in power. And as somebody who is a minority that D&D was not meant for, it's such an important thing to realize that cis men have been doing this for 30, 40 years now. They've been telling their own stories. So, D&D was built around the stories of cis white men, and who are usually straight, and, all of these things. So if we want to change D&D, it's important to realize that we have to tell our stories. We have to be empowered to be like, no, these are stories about women. These are stories about non-binary people. These are stories about trans people and the struggles that they go through and the thoughts that they have, the things that they do, the choices they make, and the kinds of monsters that, a person who's empowered to be telling that story, you could look at the source material that a white man wrote in the 80s and be like, I don't jive with that. So here's what I'm going to do to fix it. Because as the storyteller, you have the power to look at the official lore and say, no, I'm going to change that. Actually, she has all of this nuance that she's not just an evil character who's, on a revenge plot to hate men. That there's a reason that she's like this. She has a weakness that's not just, like her belly. So, you stab her there enough times and but like, it's that empowerment of being the storyteller and putting people who are minorities, who D&D was not meant for. These people don't like how to play D&D because they just don't like it biologically. They weren't built for role playing. You put these people in power and you let them tell their stories. So you get stories that are, coming from people who are Filipino, people who are people of color. You have women, you have non-binaries, you have trans people, and suddenly there's all of this diversity, and that's how you change D&D. That is how you fix D&D, by playing the game, getting to know it, and feeding information back to Wizards of the Coast, who hopefully will listen to feedback, or else, we're just gonna
move on,
not buy the material, and move on to Pathfinder, or move on to Vampire the Masquerade, or move on to whatever else it is. But I think that change comes from people playing the material and then giving feedback. We're not gonna just evolve into, oh, white men will eventually let us play D&D. I don't if we just let them be there and let them have their thing and just exist, then nothing's gonna happen. Nothing's gonna change. Wizards gonna keep doing the same thing that they're doing. But in order to have change, we need to be partaking in the culture. And that's why I think that being a DM is such an important role for that change, to understand the culture, to understand how it works, and to begin making those changes. Because as players, yeah, you could work with your DM if your DM's a white man and be like, listen, I don't jive with the table that I'm rolling from. I don't want my character to like shiny objects, for example. So I'm gonna change it to something else. And you can, of course, you can work with, your DM, but are you making a bigger change in that case? For your table, maybe. But to have a bigger impact, I feel like being a DM, being the storyteller, creating a fictional world where there is no patriarchy, where it's a matriarchy and not a reverse patriarchy, which is a whole other thing in D&D. So fixing it from the inside, from the lore, and then spreading those stories and being look, there's not just this one way to play D&D. And sharing.
So I take it back, all women out there, you have to DM at least once. Sorry, I don't make the rules, except I do, and I just said that. So listen to me.
Have the two of you stumbled upon Desi Quest?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I've heard of it.
Beautifully done. As someone who is a very white Croatian lady, but who loves Asian and Greek and Egyptian mythology and was a big mythology nerd and loved Arabian Nights and all of it. Plus, I love everyone sitting at the table. You know, it's Jasmine, it's Reka, it's Ange, it's Lewis. So, like, they had me from hello. They were like, Natalie, it's Omar. They're like, Natalie, we're all sitting at this table and playing Desi stories. I was like, yeah, no, I will be there. Where do you want me to be? Because I'd be there. It's beautifully done. The production value is really great, and they're killing it. So I hope, because I know that they kickstarted it, so I don't know if they have like, okay, 10 episodes and we're done or whatever, but I hope it becomes something that just gets to continue.
Yeah, because we need stories like that. We need to see more, because Dimension 20 and Critical Role are amazing. They you can't argue they aren't pioneers of the actual play genre, because they absolutely are. And they will probably continue to be titans for as long as they want to keep producing content. But I'm so excited to see more diverse tables out there, to see more DMs like Abria, whom I love.
We love you, Abria.
We love Abria Iyengar. She is amazing, and anybody who has anything bad to say about her, I will personally fight you for legal purposes. That was a joke. But literally, like, I will fight you online, like go back and forth anonymously or whatever. I'll put my name to it. I don't care. I want to see more stories from DMs who just aren't white men. And I'm sure DMs like Brennan and Matt Mercer are also like, yeah, no, I think we're good. And they've been stepping down, and they have been sharing their table, and they've been playing with DMs who are part of more minority groups, and we're seeing this shift, and that's amazing. And I want to keep seeing that, and I want to keep seeing great production value shows. I want people to throw money at diverse shows. I want that to become the norm, so we can just all experience that together.
There was a week in D&D history where Burrow's End, did you watch it with Abria, with the Stoats?
No, but it's been on my list because we were on Feedback Halfling, so we got to support Jasper William Carter.
I love you too, Jasper. Jasper, you're part of the family. I'm going to cut this and send it to all of them and be like, Jasper, you're my family. Reka, you're my family. Jasmine, you're my family. Lewis actually has a friendship bracelet from me, and so does Brennan. Why? Because they're family. But so there were stoats. There were furry little stoats that Abria kept putting in very dangerous situations, so I would cry. And I know that was what she was setting out to do. And so I would just cry. I would cry, and Brennan was playing a single mom, so Brennan also wanted me to cry. The whole season was a Natalie Crybait season. And then, so that's Wednesday night. And then Thursday night, they're like, good news. Candela spooky season is going to start up on Critical Role, and Abria's the DM. She's the GM for it. And I wrote on her post, I was like, well, nothing says really good self-care like having myself be emotionally destroyed and cry through an episode of Burrow's End, only to then cry out of fear and terror for whatever you're going to do for Candela. She commented back and she went, if you do a face mask while you're crying, it's still self-care.
What icon?
Icon. You're an icon, Abria. Your family is what I'm saying.
Seeing more stuff like that, seeing more DMs who just are different than a white man, and having more people who work in the TTRPG space who aren't white men, like having writers and designers and artists, having people from the LGBTQIA+ community who don't just tell straight stories, who tell stories about all different kinds of preferences and all different types of lifestyles and all different types of just the way that you look and the way that you act and the way, everything. It's just, it can only benefit the hobby as a whole. And we champion that at every, chance that we get.
Well, usually we end the episode with manifestations that we would like to see for the future of the topic that we picked. And I think we nailed it. We want to see Abria Iyengar every day, but also the rest of the family do well. But is there anything else? If you could, now that I know that yours is Banshee, Lyssa, if you could snap and wake up tomorrow and one of the like marginalized women of D&D was given a better story. Like it's like, oh, I fixed it. And that's exactly what I needed it to be. Who would you fix?
I don't even have to think about it. It's the drow.
Oh, seconded. Yep.
It's the drow.
Yeah.
It's the drow. Mommy lols, always in our hearts. And there's just, because it's with the drow, there's not just sexism involved, unfortunately. There's racial implications there as well, because their skin is pitch black, and they're an evil society, and they live underground, and they hate the elves. Which, iconic, I love elf hating, because...
Even though you love drow.
I don't know.
Which are elves.
Even, I mean, for me, like, the elves represent, like, the Caucasian Aryan race. So that's where I'm coming from. So I'm going to support the thing that hates the elves. But the drow themselves are just so different from elves, in a way. And there is such an interesting kind of case story to look at, and which is why we're, like, fascinated by all things drow. We have 2 episodes about the drow currently, but we have so much more to say about the drow that we're already planning a 3rd episode. Fun fact: this is soon to become exclusive. But yeah, it's because they've tried fixing the drow, but it's so difficult because of how it's so ingrained into the D&D culture, because there's one specific drow man who is not like the rest. He's not like the other guys, who's the only one good drow to ever have lived, and he was written stories about and became notorious and this shining light of, for every guy reading D&D in books specifically. To go back and then change that, and then the sexism, and then the racism. D&D most of the time is like, let's just not, because it's difficult. So we'll just kind of gloss over the fact that they're problematic and be like, here's a new shiny thing called Spelljammers, which are like flying ships and space. How about we focus on that?
We gave you astronauts. Like, I don't understand.
We gave you space hamsters. Like, eat your crumbs.
It's space pirates. Like, what do you mean you want, like, drow to be fixed? We gave you space hamsters and, like, space pirates. What, killer clowns or something?
I don't understand. All of you Sondheim fans, we literally gave you giants in the sky. Like, we did that.
They're big, tall, terrible giants in the sky.
In the sky. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing. D&D has always meant a lot to me, and storytelling has always meant a lot to me. And I think a lot of that goes from having a gossipy Croatian family, but also having D&D always be a really big part of my life. So please plug where everyone can find you.
I mean, literally everywhere. So you can find our podcast wherever you pod your cast. We're on Spotify, we're on Apple, we're on Podbean, we're literally everywhere. Just look us up. We are the Slovenly Trolls, TRULLS, everywhere where you can find podcasts. We're also on Twitter, we're on Instagram, we're on Threads, we are on Blue Sky, we're on TikTok. Yes, we're on all of those things.
Well, and tolerators, you know exactly where to find us. It's Men I've Tolerated Pod on Instagram, to all the men I've tolerated before on Patreon. At the point that this episode is airing, on the Patreon for our new exclusive series called The Misogyny Meltdown, we have covered the live Misogynist of the Year ceremony where we crowned Dax. The video is only on Patreon.
Iconic.
There is songs, dance, and comedy. And we've done February, whose theme was Self-Love is the Resistance. So that's what Misogyny Meltdown was there. We had Krista Rosa talk to me. We melted down about The Bachelor and how it sells us a story that is not true. And there were other shenanigans. So make sure you're following on Patreon, because we're adding a lot of really good stuff there. But most importantly, remember, tolerators, you don't have to smile through anything you're tolerating, including showing up to a game because you heard that there were clicky clack sparkly rocks that you could throw down, and it was a huge part of the game, only to be told that every deity that you picked to be interested was an evil slut. Smiles are for joy.